everyone, it's Allie, and today we're going to be talking about crafting in Last Epoch. Now, crafting in this game, in my opinion, feels really good to do, and I feel like it's a lot easier to get a grasp on compared to crafting in some other ARPGs. The nice thing about crafting in this game is that it's all fully deterministic, so you will know exactly what happens, while at the same time there's still being a little bit of RNG. The way I want to describe crafting in this game is that it's going to be on a bell curve, where a lot of the time you're going to get something pretty decent, and only a few times are you going to get something really bad, and only a few times are you going to get something absolutely amazing. But the most of the time, you're going to get something that's at least usable, either very usable or maybe a little bit crappy overall. So why don't we start with the absolute basics? To open up the crafting interface, you just hit F, and then you could craft anywhere you want at any point at all. You don't have to be in town, you don't have to be anywhere, you can do this anywhere you want. Now, the way crafting works in this game is it's going to be based on forging potential. All items are going to have forging potential on it, and this is going to be something that is going to be higher and higher the further you go into the game, meaning that higher end items are going to allow you to craft more on them before you run out of it. Once you do fully run out of forging potential, that's it, you're done. You cannot change the item in any way whatsoever anymore, meaning you are limited in the total amount of tries you have at making something. That does mean that making quote unquote perfect items is difficult to do, but due to this game and the way the end game is going to work with LP, which we'll touch on at the end of the video, realistically, making perfect items isn't really that important, and it really doesn't matter too much. Now, how do we actually craft? Well, this game is going to have the mods split into two categories: prefixes and suffixes. And these are going to have different pools of mods that they could possibly roll. Now, as you're traveling along, you're going to get a bunch of random glyphs to drop on the ground, a bunch of runes to drop on the ground, and most importantly, a bunch of different Affix shards. Now, as you get these in your inventory, you just simply click the transfer crafting items, and this will suck up everything from your inventory and put it into your crafting inventory. And whenever you're ready to craft, they'll just simply be there ready for you to use. Now, there are going to be quite a lot of different shards, and if you ever want to see what you have, you can always click View Materials and then just simply type in here for what you want to look for. So for example, if we wanted to look at health, we can see that I currently have 388 health shards, as well as everything else that comes up when we search health. These are going to be weighted, as in some of these are going to be substantially more common than the other ones. As you can see here, I have hundreds of resistance shards, I have hundreds of armor, dodge shards, but if we were to scroll a little bit further down, we can see that some of them, especially for gloves, since we're looking specifically at the glove shards here, are a little bit less common. So for example, I don't have many chance to shred armor on hit gloves, I don't have many leech rate shards, and if we look at prefixes, I don't have many increased AoE skills, freeze rate multiplier. Some of them are substantially less common, while some are super common. These are all weighted. Now, one thing I want to mention here is, even though these are weighted, what you could do is you could potentially always use runes of shattering to get shards off of items for whatever crafting you might want to do. One good example of that would be this helmet. Now, this helmet has +2 to Rip Blood on it. Now, the rest of this helmet wouldn't really be that good. The stats on it are kind of bad. The forging potential is kind of low, so I wouldn't really be able to turn this into a very good helmet if I was playing a Rip Blood build. What I could instead do is I could just simply use a rune of shattering, and what this is going to do is going to destroy the item, but it's going to give me shards based on the affixes that was on here, with me gaining more shards the higher the tier was. So for example, this is tier 5 Rip Blood. So if I were to shatter this, as you can see, I would get 4 Rip Blood shards, 1 physical resistance shard, and 4 dexterity shards. Now, as you can see there were 4 different affixes on these, and I only got 3 different shards. You are not guaranteed to actually get the shards based on what is on the gloves, but the higher the roll, the higher the chance of you actually getting shards, and the higher the amount of shards you can actually get. So this could be a way for you to be on the lookout for anything that you want. For example, let's say I need a bunch of critical avoidance shards. I could pick up items with that and just keep shattering them to build up a big stockpile of whatever I might need. But obviously, as you can see here, there's a chance that I just simply don't get the shards. So it's a little bit RNG, but something you can do to collect more. So the beauty of the system is, because you have so many shards dropped from the beginning of the game, I would really recommend for you to always be crafting starting from the first zone that you make your character in. What you can do is you can find half decent items like this off of the ground and turn them into really good items. So in this case, we have a pair of boots that has a little bit of life on it and a little bit of vitality. I could take these off the ground and say, well, these don't have movement speed, I don't really want to use them. And because they have forging potential and because they have an open prefix, I could just simply go and add movement speed to the boots to then have a decent pair of leveling boots. And you can do this all the way through your leveling experience. So adding mods onto your items is just as simple as clicking the open prefix or the open suffix if you have an open suffix, selecting what you want to add, and then it's going to use a random amount of forging potential to do said action. So in this case, it's going to cost 1 to 18 forging potential, and we have 20 in total. And we're going to pray that it uses a small amount so we could do more. As we can see, we added a tier 1 roll to our item, and in this game, rolls work backwards to Path of Exile, for example, where tier 1 is the lowest roll and tier 7 is the highest roll, with tier 5 being the highest you can actually craft. As we can see here, we got 7 forging potential eaten up. Now what we could do is we can augment this. So for example, we have glyphs, which we can add right here. These are going to do different things based on which one we use. The one we're going to mostly be interested in is the Glyph of Hope. You're going to have so many of these thrown at you, and I would really recommend to pretty much always use them. What they do is they just give you a 25% chance that whatever you do just does not cost forging potential. So if we were to have used one there, instead of it eating 7 forging potential, there was just a 25% chance we could have done that action for free. We also have, for example, Glyph of Chaos. So for example, let's say I really like Vitality, Movement Speed, and Life on here, but I really don't like the health regeneration. What I could do is I could use a Glyph of Chaos, and this is going to upgrade the health regeneration tier to tier 4, but it's also going to reroll it to something else from the available suffix pool. So if we were to do it here, as you can see, it used up 13 forging potential. So unfortunately, the item is completely bricked now. We cannot craft on it anymore. So we'd have to be fine with whatever we got here. And it ended up rerolling it into dodge rating. Some other things we could have done, for example, is if we had a little bit of forging potential left and we were happy with how the item looked, but we weren't happy with the rolls. For example, we rolled 43 life out of a range of 41 to 55, we could have potentially used a Rune of Refinement to re-roll the modifier values on our items. That would have re-rolled everything on here, and we could potentially gone 55 health, for example. Now, these runes are very expensive to use. As you can see here, it's going to cost 1 to 15 forging potential, and it might potentially make these gloves worse off than they were. This is something you're only going to really want to do at the end if you have an additional 1 or 2 forging potential and you're not happy with the way the item looks. Now, some other things you could do here is you can specifically try to remove a specific mod if you need an open something on it. For example, we could use a rune of removal, and it's going to just randomly remove something off of here. But as you can see, it's also going to be very expensive. Now, all these runes can be modified with Glyphs of Hope, meaning that we're going to have a 25% chance that the rune is going to be free. There's no way to specifically make it remove a prefix or a suffix, and it's going to be very expensive. But as we can see here, if we were to use it, we use up 1 forging potential and we opened up a prefix. This is a very lucky outcome simply because we kept most of the forging potential on the item, and this means we can output whatever else we want in here. So for example, if you wanted cast speed, we could now potentially put cast speed on it. Now, as you might see here, this item looks a little bit special. This is an exalted item. So as I mentioned earlier, tier 5 is the highest roll that you can actually craft something to. So if I were to level this health regen, I could only go to tier 5. As you can see, it would not let me go to tier 6, but this health is specifically tier 6. Anything with a tier 6 mod is going to be an exalted item. As you can see here, this item is of purple quality. Now in this game, we have the typical ARPG quality. We have common items, which have no mods on them. We have rare items, which have up to 4 mods on it, and we have magic items which have 2 mods on them. Now, these are going to be items that you are not going to see until you get to endgame. These only specifically drop in endgame. And as you can see here, if you look at the health, it says tier 6 and it says drop only. Now, most of the exalted items that you're going to see are going to be tier 6. There is tier 7 as well, but getting an item with tier 7 is substantially less common than an item with tier 6. These are not only very powerful because this effectively just immediately finishes 1/4 of your items, because this pair of gloves just already came with a very high health roll. But the other nice thing is, if this were to roll on a good base with maybe 1 or 2 other useful mods on it, you can very easily just finish crafting the last 1 or 2 affixes that's missing to get yourself a really strong item overall. Overall, crafting, in my opinion, is just really easy and it's really intuitive to get into. All you have to do is just simply upgrade your shards. If there's something you don't like, you could just attempt to Glyph of Chaos it into something that's potentially useful. And then as long as you have enough shards, you can just keep upgrading items until they have good mods on them. Now, another thing to mention here is going to be, well, what is good to put together? Well, that's really going to depend on your build. It's very difficult for me to tell you, oh, you need to get exactly this and this and this on a piece of gear, because not every build is going to be the same and not every build is going to want the same general stats. What I can typically tell you is that resistances are good, because there are quite a lot of different resistance types in Last Epoch, and you are going to want to max all of them by the time you get to endgame. At the same time, health is also a generally pretty decent stat on most pieces of gear. Other than that, typically prefixes are saved for damage, and it's where most of the damage and most of the impactful rolls are going to happen, while suffixes are typically generally saved for defensive rolls. That's not always the case, as there are some suffixes that also give you damage. For example, on weapons, we might might see things such as chance to chill, chance to ignite, chance to poison, and so on and so forth. And if you ever want to see what a shard can actually be applied onto, if you just open up your inventory and go to view materials without having your crafting interface open, this is just going to show you every single shard that you own, regardless of the type of item that can go on. So for example, if I want to know, well, what can I actually put health on? I can hover over the health shard here and you can see that's going to add flat health, not percent health. I could specifically go on all of those items. If I want to see, for example, well, what can cast speed go on? As we can see here, cast speed is not a suffix, so we'd have to look at prefixes. And we can see that these are the specific items that cast speed can go on, which might make it really easy to learn where can you put specific roles. So for example, if you're a cast speed based build and you want a lot of cast speed, this might be an easy way for you to learn where you can potentially find cast speed roles, and two, keep this as a way to know what kind of items you want to be looking for. So for example, this might let you know that, hey, I should look for half decent gloves, and if they don't have cast speed on them, I just put cast speed on them. Or hey, I should look for a decent dagger or a scepter or a wand, and I can roll cast speed on it to have even more cast speed for my build. So next up, I want to talk about legendary potential and what it does and how much of an impact it has on endgame and endgame crafting. So what legendary potential is a role that you'll sometimes see on your gear. So for example, here we have an Urzil's Pride that has 2 legendary potential. What this means is if you were to come to where I am currently in Temporal Sanctum and you use the Eternity Cache, what you could do is you could put an item with legendary potential in here and then put in a donor item, and then what it would do is it would steal however much legendary potential the item has mods off of the donor item. So in this case, with 2 legendary potential in Urzil's Pride, it would steal 2 of the random 4 mods on my chest plates and permanently add them onto the Urzil's Pride. If you want some examples of what this might look like, here's a leveling belt that I made where I stole 1 additional potion slot and health gain on potion use and a massive life roll. So I have a leveling belt that's really good for leveling due to movement speed with just a massive health roll on it. Making items like this can potentially turn some items that have useful and impactful mods, but overall the rest of the item is kind of garbage, into powerhouses that could become a best in slot item for your build. So a good example of this might be Arrow Guard. Arrow Guard is a great defensive quiver because it gives you a way to chanting blow cap on marksman if you can't make it work in any other way, as well as it giving you a lot of armor. But as you can see, it has no offensive stats on it at all. It realistically has no health or resistances or any sort of other useful mods. This is a quiver that is heavily weighted towards that chance to receive a glancing blow to the point where the rest of it isn't good. Well, what we could do is if we had a high LP version of this is we could craft a quiver and then we could use this quiver as a way to donate some of the mods onto this. So for example, I could take this bow attack speed off of this quiver and put it onto this one. So now I have an Arrow Guard with attack speed on it, which would make it substantially stronger. If you want some examples of what this might look like, for example, my last episode of Living, which is an amazing pair of low life boots, I managed to put 2 life rolls on them, making them substantially stronger, making my build overall a lot tankier. Now, as I mentioned, this can only be done inside the Temporal Sanctum, and based on the level of the item that you want to do this to, you're going to do higher and higher levels of Temporal Sanctum. Now, the final thing I want to mention about legendary potential before we give an example of how you might want to make a donor item is how it rolls in general. So the higher the legendary potential on an item, the less common it's going to be. So for example, getting 2 LP on an Urzil's Pride, I would say is a decently uncommon event to happen. Getting a 3 LP or a 4 LP Urzil's Pride, for example, might be unbelievably rare to basically never going to happen. The other factor that matters here is the level requirement of the item itself. So because it's the level 15 requirement item, the chances of me seeing 1, 2, 3, and even 4 LP is substantially higher than, for example, an item like Twisted Heart, which is a level 80 requirement, to where even seeing just 1 LP on this item is basically the same thing as winning the lottery. The more common your item is, so in this case, an Arrow Guard, which is a level 7 item, the higher the likeliness that's going to have LP in the first place, which means you'll see a 2LP version of this pretty quickly, and maybe even a 3LP version if you get kind of lucky. But for example, seeing a 3LP Twisted Heart is just not going to happen. Now, let's say you did have an item that you were ready to squish like this and you're ready to donate items to. Now, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to make an item like this, something that has 4 good mods on it to where you don't really care which of the mods get eaten. What you want to do is you want to craft an item that has as many useful mods on it so you don't get unlucky. If you want a good example of getting unlucky, I attempted wanted to make a scepter that I was going to put into my 2 LP fire starters, and I only rolled for 2 mods while the other 2 mods were completely garbage, and unfortunately it decided to donate both of the garbage mods while me not gaining either of the mods I actually wanted. So you really want to try and make a half decent item. What I have here is a pair of jewelries, and what I want to do is I want to very quickly show you some examples of how you might go about crafting a item as a donor item. I decided to go get a few gloves from my stash, and I'm just going to very quickly attempt to craft them just to showcase you the process of how you might go about making something good enough to throw into a LP item. So first here, let's start with these gloves. So what I really want from these gloves is going to be the health. Health is going to be really nice for my build, but I would also like to potentially get cast speed or any sort of other useful roll. Now, cast speed is a prefix, so what we can do is we can simply add to the open prefix cast speed, and because we want this to be as high of a roll as possible, we are going to need to use Glyph of Hopes to have as high of a chance as possible to not eat up any of the forging potential. So we're going to start spamming them. And I really need a high roll. So here we're getting really lucky, not using up much forging potential. And we did end up getting a tier 5 one without eating much of my forging potential. So now 2 of the 4 mods on here are mods I'd be happy with. I'm okay if it eats a cast speed, and I'm okay if it eats a health. Now, I don't need word gain on potion use, although it might be okay for my build. And I don't really need necrotic resistance either. My resistances are pretty good. I would need some physical and some poison. So instead, what we could do is we could potentially try to reroll this to see if we get something more useful. There aren't really any other useful prefixes. If we quickly go look at prefixes, all we really have here would be intelligence. That's the only other thing that'd be useful for me, or potentially minion health. But the total mod pool here of different mods is a little bit too low for me to potentially get something good. While for suffixes, I would really like to get physical resistance. I'd also be okay with things like health regen or endurance or any other resistances, as it might be able to make me change some of my gear later on. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this necro resistance and we're going to use Glyph of Chaos to attempt to reroll it. What I could also do here, since I have 33 LP, is I could potentially use a Glyph of Despair to attempt to just completely remove it. And why don't we actually attempt that? So we're going to use this. What it's going to do is it's going to potentially seal this, so I have an open suffix back. And the nice thing is that sealed affixes cannot be eaten for LP, so that would mean that the necrotic resistance can never be picked. So we'll try to seal it. We didn't get lucky. We could try again. We still have 20 forging potential. We didn't get lucky again, so unfortunately, we are going to have to live with tier 5 necrotic resistance if we do end up getting it. Now, we could try the same thing for the word gain on potion use. I could try to seal it to put something else on here, but instead, I think we'll just send a Glyph of Chaos and pray that we hit something good. We did get median life, which is great, which means that 3 of these 4 mods are things that I might potentially want. Now, I do have 1 LP left, so what I could potentially do here is quickly look at the rolls and see, are these well rolled? So for example, the health is 1 off of a perfect roll. The cast speed is 1 off of perfect cast speed. I could use my forging potential to use a rune of refinement to try and make it better, but I think these are as good as we can get. Now, I could just immediately send these and whatever happens, happens, but we can also attempt to use other gloves as well to see if we can make something better. If you're going to craft something for LP, especially if you end up hitting something really good, if you end up hitting like a 3 LP item, you're going to want to go through multiple iterations of items until you hit something really good. Honestly, I think these gloves are pretty good. I think personally, I'd be pretty happy with any of the 3 rolls on here. So all we have to do is just simply send it. We would just take our jewelries and put them in here. We would take the gloves that we want to donate, seal the cache, and then we would simply just travel in time to the future, open up the cache, and see what we hit. So we end up hitting the necrotic resistance, which I guess could be okay in some cases. I would have preferred the life or the cast speed or the minion health a little bit more, but that's how you would get yourself a pair of LP items. And that is the general gist of crafting this game. I think it's very simple to follow along. It's just simply add prefixes or add suffixes based on what you need, or reroll them until you get something decent, and you just have limited attempts with the forging potential that you have. In my opinion, crafting this game is really fun and intuitive, and I would just recommend just go and try it. Don't be afraid of potentially bricking your items or making them garbage. Just keep trying it. You're going to get so many half-decent items that you could potentially turn into pretty good items that it's a really easy way for you to learn by trial and error. Don't be afraid to try and make decent items. And I think you'll just be able to learn really quickly. I really like it personally. Now, I know some people might hate it because, for example, in Path of Exile, you can infinitely keep crafting on an item until it's absolutely perfect. But in my opinion, I think for 80 to 90% of people, that's not really relevant simply because crafting in Path of Exile is so unbelievably expensive to do and prohibitive to do that most people are not going to really experience all of the different modification they can actually do in that game. In this game, in comparison, because all it costs you is your shards, and because it's fairly easy to get most of the general shards that you're going to want, it's really easy to make half decent items. It's really easy to experiment and to learn it. I think a big roadblock in something like Path of Exile is simply the fact that it costs so much money to craft and to even hit something half decent that most people just don't even learn or bother to learn it and simply just buy their gear because it's too expensive for you to even attempt to learn. If you have any questions about crafting, I'd be more than happy to answer any of your questions in the comments below. I also stream on Twitch every single day, and I'll be streaming for the next week and a half leading up to the last Epoch launch. And then I'll be streaming last Epoch post-launch until the start of the 324 season. So you can expect over a month to a month and a half of nonstop last Epoch content out of me. And if you just want to come hang out with the cuties or ask your questions on Twitch, I'll be more than happy to see you there as well. As always, cuties, I hope you enjoy the video, and I'll see you in the next one.